Welcome, welcome students to my YouTube channel Ujwal's Biology Classes. Today we will be going to deal with the chapter Life Process and the topic in it, the Human Respiratory System. So first of all, let's take a look at the parts of the human respiratory system. So we know that all the organs which perform a particular function are designated as the organ system. So likewise, all the organs which take part or participate in the process of respiration are called the organs of the respiratory system. Now let us have a look at which are the organs of the human respiratory system. So first starting with it's the nose, then coming back to the nasal chamber or the nasal passage. Thirdly, we will be having the trachea or the windpipe. Next, the bronchi, the lungs, which is the most important part of the human respiratory system. And finally, we will be having the diaphragm. Now let's have a look at where are these parts situated in our body. So here is the diagram of the human respiratory system, and we will be starting with the nose and the mouth through which the air enters. It goes to the nasal passage, and this portion is called the pharynx, the portion between the mouth and the trachea. The pharynx has the voice box, which is also known as larynx. Next, it continues to be the trachea or the windpipe, which finally enters into the lungs, forming bronchus. The bronchus further divides into bronchiole and finally into the alveoli. The ribcage is being mentioned over here because this structure or this cage-like skeletal system structure protects our lungs and the heart. This is the diaphragm, which is a sheet of a muscle that separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal duct or the digestive glands below. Now let us have a look into the passage of air or the flow of air from the atmosphere into the lungs. The human respiratory system begins with the nose, then the air goes into the nasal passage. The nasal passage is lined with very fine hair and mucus. When air passes through the nasal passage, the dust particles and all other impurities present in it are trapped by the nasal hair and mucus, so that ultimately the clean air can go into the lungs. The part of the throat between the mouth and the windpipe is called the pharynx. From the nasal chamber, air enters into the pharynx and then goes into the windpipe through the larynx. The trachea or the windpipe does not collapse even when there is no air inside the trachea. The reason is because the trachea is supported by rings of soft bones or cartilage. The trachea runs down the neck and further divides into two small tubes called the bronchi at the lower end. Each bronchi now enters into the respective right and the left lungs. The bronchi are connected to the two lungs. The lungs lie in the chest cavity, or which is also termed as the thoracic cavity. Now, this thoracic cavity, as I have said, that it is separated from the abdominal cavity by a muscular partition, which is also known as the diaphragm. Each bronchus divides in the lungs to form a small and a large network of tubes which are called the bronchioles. Like the bronchus divides into the primary bronchiole, to the secondary bronchiole, and to the tertiary bronchiole. Ultimately, it ends in the pouch-like air sacs at the end of the smallest bronchioles, and these are known as alveoli. The walls of the alveoli are very thin and they are surrounded by the thin blood capillaries. And in the alveoli, the gaseous exchange takes place. So now we can easily see the passage of the air as the air from the nose, from the nasal passage, through the pharynx, then coming back to the trachea, the bronchi enters into the lungs, forming the right and the left bronchioles, and finally ending up into the alveoli. Going to the next slide, let us first of all see the mechanism of breathing. Now we know that breathing is a physical exercise which constitutes of the inhalation of air and the exhalation of air. So first, let us take a look as to what is the process of inhalation. Now what do you mean by inhalation? Now inhalation is taking in air. So inhalation of air into the lungs. Now, what are the conditions for it which can help the air to come inside into the lungs? First, the ribs expand. Here, the ribs are connected by the intercostal muscles. So, these intercostal muscles contract and the ribs expand. Next, the diaphragm, see this portion was the original portion where the diaphragm used to lie. But during inhalation, this diaphragm moves down and becomes more or less flattened. So ultimately, these two events, when take place, the thoracic cavity, the volume of the thoracic cavity increases. As we know that when the volume increases, the pressure decreases. So outside the atmosphere, the air is in higher pressure, and that is why the air rushes inside the lungs to fill that empty space. Next, the same things happen in the reverse order in the process of exhalation, where the air is breathed out of the body. So first of all, again, we will be taking a look at the rib cage. Now the intercostal muscles relax. Here the muscles contracted, here it relaxed. And the rib cage now moves inwards into the thoracic cavity. The diaphragm now moves up with a more dome-like shape. So thereby decreasing the volume of the thoracic cavity. So due to this, air is now, the pressure inside is higher than the pressure outside. So this pressure is used to take the gases and release it out of our body. So now let us take a look into the next part. So now we will be going into the next slide, that is the mechanism of respiration. In the previous slide, we had discussed about the process of inhalation and exhalation, and in inhalation we have come up to that part that air has entered into the alveoli. So let us first of all take a very closer look of the alveolar sac or the individual alveoli. So here is the bronchiole which finally ends up and forms a alveolar sac. An alveolar sac contains numerous small balloon-like structure known as alveolus in singular, and in plural it is known as alveoli. As we can see that the entire alveolar structure is very surrounded by the blood vessels. We have the red one that is carrying the oxygenated blood, and the blue one which has the deoxygenated blood or carbon dioxide rich blood. Now see, you have studied earlier that it is the artery which carries oxygen related blood, and it is the vein which carries the deoxygenated blood. But here the process is reversing. Here the blue one is the pulmonary arteriole. See, arteriole and venule are the smaller parts of an artery and a vein respectively. So here the pulmonary arteriole is blue in color, that is, it consists of the deoxygenated blood, and it is taking this blood from the heart and it is coming to the lungs for purification. After the process of purification, when oxygen from the atmosphere will be diffused inside the blood, then this oxygenated blood will be carried by the pulmonary venule into the pulmonary vein, and then it will enter into the heart, through which it will be circulated throughout the body. So see, this pulmonary vein and pulmonary arterioles forms a dense network of capillary on the surfaces of this alveolus. So now let us take a look at the diffusion process, how the exchange of gases in the alveoli take place. So see, this is the structure of the alveoli, and this layer over here is the alveolar membrane, which is this one, the alveolar membrane, the inner one. I think you are getting it. Now this is the blood vessel, generally the capillary, which surrounds each alveolus. This is the capillary which is entering. This is the capillary membrane. And what do you mean by the respiratory membrane? Both the membranes of the alveolar as well as the capillary membrane, both are termed together as the respiratory membrane. Now, the pulmonary artery from the heart brings the deoxygenated or carbon dioxide rich blood into the lungs. Now see here, the rate of carbon dioxide is much more over here, and there is very limited oxygen. So as a result, oxygen is now inhaled and the value of oxygen is much more inside the alveolus. So diffusion takes place. So oxygen from a region of higher concentration easily diffuses to a region of the lower concentration. Similarly, here the amount of carbon dioxide in the blood is much more than inside the alveolus. So CO2 now moves from the capillary into the alveolus, and finally this will be by the process of exhalation, this carbon dioxide will be released outside into the body. After the exchange of gases takes place, now these are the red blood cells which are again filled up with oxygen. The hemoglobin content inside this has bind up with oxygen, and now it forms the pulmonary vein, and finally it will enter into the heart, which will now pump this oxygenated blood through the aorta and finally into all the other parts of the body, to each and every cells of the body. And in that cells, the process of the breakdown of the glucose will be taking place in the presence of this oxygen. And that is termed as cellular respiration, which generally takes place inside the mitochondria for the production of ATP. Now we will be moving on to our next slide. Let us find out what is this breathing cycle. The breathing cycle is the description of changes. What changes? The pressure, change in the volume of the lungs, and the air flow within the respiratory tract, which is occurring during a normal cycle of breathing. Breathing, we know, consists of inhalation and the exhalation, and it is a rhythmic process. So, this is known as the breathing cycle. So, it can be divided into three stages. The first one is the inspiration or the inhalation phase, which is followed by a small duration of resting phase, and then we again have the expiration or the exhalation phase. So these occur in a circular way, and hence it is known as the breathing cycle. In each phase, there is a change in pressure, there is a change in the volume of the lungs, and there is a change in the direction of the gases which are moving, sometime from outside to inside the body, and sometimes from inside the body to outside the body. Let us have a look. Here is a very important topic about the residual volume of air. Now, you have heard about the concept of reserve in motor vehicles, so that in terms of emergency, you can easily fill up your bike. So, as a way, here also during the breathing cycle, when the air is inhaled and exhaled, the lungs always contain, or rather preserve, a reserve volume of air inside it. And hence, why is this necessary? The residual volume, why it is necessary? So that the exchange of gases which takes place in the alveolus does not stop, because the blood which is coming through the capillaries will not stop. It will continuously be flow. So the exchange of gases or the diffusion is going to be in a continuation manner, and that's why that process is exhibited by the residual volume of air. Now we have to also remember the value of what a normal lungs has in the form of residual air. Now it is about 1200 ml of the total air lungs capacity. The volume of residual air which has in the normal lungs is about 1200 ml. Moving on to the next slide, we have the rate of breathing, which is also known as the breathing rate. What is breathing rate? Now it is defined as the number of breaths a person takes per minute. And breathe is one inhalation and one exhalation. So the number of inhalations and exhalations which a person takes per minute is termed as the breathing rate. So what is the normal value of the breathing rate? The average breathing rate in a normal adult man at rest is about 15 to 18 times per minute. Why I have added over here at rest? Because obviously during certain kind of physical exercise, the breathing rate will automatically increase. Now any value which is less or below than 12 times, or certainly more than 25 times at rest, is considered to be something abnormal breathing rate. If that person is doing certain kind of physical exercise, it is bound to be more than 20 to 25. But if that person is at rest and then also the breathing rate is around 24, 25, then it must be there is an indication of certain kind of disease which is going on in that particular person. The process of breathing is involuntary. That is, it is not under the control of our own will, but the rate of breathing is controlled by the respiratory system of the brain. Like the brain controls the rate of breathing, but the process of breathing, it is involuntary. So you must have seen that a small child has a very high breathing rate. So it is not a time to concern, because up to 6 months, if there is a child, he or she can breathe up to 30 to 60 breaths per minute. For an infant of 6 to 12 months, it will be decreasing into 24 to 30 breaths per minute. Now, as and on, it will be increasing in the age, like 12 years and above, then it will be around 12 to 20 breaths per minute. Moving on to a very interesting topic about hemoglobin. And this topic, I'll be specially discussing it in detail when we will be doing the circulatory system. Now, hemoglobin is a very interesting pigment which is also known over here as the respiratory pigment. And it is because it is due to the hemoglobin that the oxygen or the exchange of gases from the surrounding to our body is happening so smoothly. So we know what is hemoglobin and what is the function of hemoglobin in respiration. The main respiratory gas, that is oxygen, combines with hemoglobin in the blood, and hence it is the hemoglobin which combines with the oxygen, forms a stable compound, oxyhemoglobin, and through this it is transported to all the cells and tissues of our body. Now, what is the normal range of hemoglobin? You might have sometimes go for a blood test, and in that you have seen that the hemoglobin va- value is given. So the normal range of hemoglobin in blood is around 12 to 18 grams per deciliter of blood. So deciliter is also a unit of measurement. So it is around 12 to 18 grams per deciliter. If the value is less than 9 or around 8, then that person is said to be suffering from severe anemia. So the deficiency as hemoglobin reduces the oxygen carrying capacity by the blood, because the less amount of hemoglobin, less amount of oxygen will be binding with that particular hemoglobin, and hence that deficiency of the oxygen, because oxygen will not be able to carry on to the cells will be requiring a certain amount of oxygen, but due to the deficiency of hemoglobin, that amount of oxygen will not be reaching the cells, and that will result into the breathing problems, tiredness, and ultimately leading to the lack of energy or fatigueness. Now, I'll be talking about the carbon monoxide poisoning. This is another very interesting topic. First of all, we have to just understand how carbon monoxide forms. Now, when any fuel, be it the coal or a petroleum or any kind of product which is a fuel, if that fuel is burning in insufficient supply of air, like in lack of oxygen, then it will be producing carbon monoxide gas. So we can say the incomplete combustion can generally release carbon monoxide. Now, there is a very interesting fact about hemoglobin, that the hemoglobin pigment has a very strong affinity to get combined with the carbon monoxide than the oxygen. And the affinity power by which hemoglobin is combined with carbon monoxide is around 210 times greater than that with the affinity rate of hemoglobin combining with oxygen. So if I take carbon monoxide and if I take oxygen, hemoglobin will very fast combine with carbon monoxide. You can just imagine 210 times greater affinity power. So the carbon monoxide combines with hemoglobin very strongly and ultimately forms a very stable compound which does not dissociate or degrade very easily. And that stable compound is known as carboxyhemoglobin. Due to this, oxygen cannot combine with hemoglobin because that amount of hemoglobin is already being occupied by the carbon monoxide, and hence again there will be a strong deficiency in the oxygen content of the body, and sometimes which can later proceed to the brain death or death of the body, because for the living to sustain, for all the cells to work properly, they will require oxygen. And due to the formation of carboxyhemoglobin, the entire body or the entire blood vessels will be carrying with CO and not O2. So these are the signs of certain kind of carbon monoxide poisoning. You will be first of all getting headaches, then nausea, there will be a slight dizziness, short of breath or breathlessness, finally collapse and on unconsciousness. So, dear students, if you think this video and presentation is helpful to you, then please kindly like, subscribe, and share my channel, that is Ujwal's Biology Classes. Till then, thank you. I'll be moving on to the next, that is circulatory system, in the coming days. Thank you very much.